Hello, everyone. I think we are live here now. So thank you, everyone, for joining to this space of conversation. While we continue to work on putting the slides, I would like to I would like to greet you because of joining today. It's a very interesting conversation in advance of COP, a necessary one too. So today we are going to be presenting this climate financed for fast action on methane reduction and just transition in the waste sector webinar. I'm going to be the moderator here. I'm Nicolas Diaz. I am the Senior Program Manager for the Waste and Circular Economy Program at the Global Methane Hub. We partnered with the Global Alliance for Incinerator Alternatives as a great partner. We have been conducting a lot of work so far. So our work is to address methane emissions in the very short term because of the climate implications of this very silent but increasingly visible pollutant. And the main emission sectors of methane are energy, agriculture, and waste. So that brings us to this interesting conversation about a critical component of how to transform the sector, and that's the financial component of what we try to do. So I would like to invite you to type in your names, your organization, and where are you joining from. Today we are covering the Americas, Africa, and European time zones. We have a broad diversity of regions being represented here. Also, being mindful of that, we have simultaneous interpretation for Portuguese and Spanish today. So please check on your Zoom options to turn those on. About today, we are going to be sharing some initial findings from the report that GAIA commissioned to the Climate Policy Initiative. This report provides us some insights on the challenges, opportunities, and recommendations for climate finance in addressing methane, and also ensuring just transition in the sector. So we are going to be hearing about the best practices in Brazil and Indonesia. These are going to be presented by our colleagues from Polis Institute and YPBB Bandung. These two organizations are members of GAIA, actually. And also we are going to be hearing from the latest analysis from CBI about those cases. Today, we are going to have also our panelists from the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change of Brazil, and also from the Intergovernmental Organization Climate and Clean Air Coalition. So the flow of the webinar is going to follow as this. We are going to hear first from Mariel Vilella. She's Global Climate Program Director at GAIA. And she is going to set the context on the report and share the state of play for climate finance and policy for the waste sector. She's going to be followed by Victor Argentino from the Polis Institute. He's the solid waste project coordinator there, and he's going to be presenting the best practices in several cities from the research and engagement in Brazil. We'll also be hearing from Fictor Ferdinand, often called Piki, who is the managing director of YPBB Bandung. He's going to be sharing some experience from the city that's also covered in the report. And we are going to be hearing finally from Tisa Mafira, who is the director of CPI, who is going to be presenting the initial findings of the report that's based in these two case studies. Last but not least, we're going to be hearing from two respondents representing governmental organizations First, we're going to have Alberto da Rocha Neto, who has been involved in solid waste management and in the implementation of the National Solid Waste Policy and the National Solid Waste Plan in Brazil. He's General Coordinator of Urban Solid Waste in the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change of Brazil. And also we have Donovan Story, who's waste and climate expert from the Climate and Clean Air Coalition, and he acts as the Secretariat expert on waste and climate change. He supports and catalyzes the actions of state and not state actors to reduce emission of short-lived climate pollutants that include methane, black carbon, among others. So that's it. We are going to hold a final Q&A session. So please make sure you post your questions in the chat and in the Q&A function. So we are going to move now to the house rules. First, Gordon, feel free to share and discuss in the chat box. We want to keep this conversation as lively and dynamic as possible. So please feel free to do so. You can ask questions using the Q&A panel. So please check your Zoom app for that. And also, we are going to be sharing the recording of this webinar that's also live. So please keep that in mind. And please, I don't want to delay more. Please, let's go with our first speaker, Mariel, if you want to open the mic.
Thank you so much, Nico, and hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'd like to get us started by taking a step back and looking at the global policy context. As you know, there's really high stakes in this momentum. Starting with the launch of the Global Methane Pledge, which was, as you know, was a really positive step to put methane emissions on the spotlight, and more than 150 countries signed this pledge to reduce methane emissions before 2030 and make, in this way, a critical contribution to keeping the 1.5 goal of the Paris Agreement alive. And of course, this drove massive attention to the waste sector, this being the third largest source of anthropogenic methane emissions. Moreover, at COP28 last year, we saw the launch of the Low Methane Partnership, where GAIA is a partner, along with many other critical stakeholders in this conversation. The Low Methane Partnership aims to unlock investment of over $10 billion to deliver waste methane emission reduction in 40 subnational jurisdictions before 2030. And then looking at COP29, just round the corner, the main agenda point is to set the new climate finance goal. And we also expect a declaration on waste methane reduction by the COP29 presidency, the government of Azerbaijan. And even more looking at COP30, we know that countries are also updating their national climate plans, the NDCs. The NDCs, the national climate plans that will determine the national priorities for investment and climate action. So definitely this is a context with high stakes on climate finance and priorities for methane reduction in the waste sector. Next. And so when we zoom in into the climate finance for methane reduction in the waste sector, what we see is that so far climate finance for methane reduction in the waste sector has gone to waste to energy incineration. According to the CPI report from 2023, 94% of this climate finance went to this technology, which is extremely problematic. It's what we call a harmful financial trend. Given that this is a highly carbon-intensive source of energy, it's a source of pollution, it's an incredibly expensive way to treat waste, and it's also a direct threat to the livelihoods of the informal sector, vulnerable communities that live off retrieving materials in the waste sector, and the recycling de facto system in the global south in many cases. To the point that this activity, waste to energy incineration, has been excluded from the European Union Sustainable Finance Taxonomy, precisely because of the threat that it poses to circular economy and climate change targets. And only last week, where I live in the UK, the BBC launched year-long research announcing that now waste-to-energy incineration is the dirtiest source of energy in the UK. And yet, we see critical investments going into waste to energy incineration, like, for example, the ADB. And other countries, in the last round of NDCs in 2021, our overview of NDCs submitted at that time showed that almost 40 NDCs out of 99 included waste to energy incineration and RDF, refuse derived fuel, in the NDCs, this is what shows a trend that is problematic, that is harmful, that needs to shift from harmful to impactful. Next. So we definitely need to increase climate finance for the waste sector. At the local level, GAIA members have been campaigning to recognize that waste management is treated as an essential public service. And in today's webinar, we will hear that funding in Brazil and in Indonesia has been low, has been insufficient to cover even the basic services, particularly funding for implementing source separation, and even ensuring universal waste collection. And this is a common reality in many countries in the global south that have a huge finance gap to scale up zero waste solutions, difficulties to sustain operational costs, political challenges to secure and allocate public funds to the waste sector. Next. And it's not only about the quantity, it's also about the quality, because we need high quality climate finance to ensure as well a just transition in the waste sector, which means that we should not rely on financial instruments that will exacerbate further the indebtedness that many countries are already suffering and being under a lot of pressure. We must ensure that this climate finance is accessible, especially to waste speakers, especially to waste workers, to local communities and organizations that are at the heart of implementing and sustaining these solutions. Next. So what does this look like? In the first place, it's critical that we prioritize the high impact solutions at the top of the waste hierarchy, which is where we can see the greatest benefits in greenhouse gas emission reductions, and also a huge wealth of co-benefits. Only implementing source separation, separate collection, and composting alone could reduce up to 62% of methane emissions in the waste sector. And if we add biostabilization of the dirty organics and biocover, we could actually reach 95% mitigation of methane in the waste sector. Next. So to emphasize the bottom line message here is it is not acceptable to invest in waste to energy incineration as a means to reduce methane emissions, as this effectively means swapping methane for CO2. And there is no point in pursuing compliance of the Global Methane Pledge with waste to energy incineration, as this will effectively undermine the Paris Agreement. This is completely absurd and nonsense, and climate finance should not be going to this technology that is so problematic in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, pollution, cost, and impact on the loss of livelihoods of vulnerable communities. So given this context, the objectives of this report that we have commissioned to CPI, and we've been working with YPBB and Polis, the goal has been to identify ways to increase the finance flow for waste methane reduction and prioritizing projects that follow the waste hierarchy, while also ensuring that finance is just, is fair, is equitable, and leaves no one behind. Next. And so in this report, we chose 2 countries, Indonesia and Brazil, where GAIA members, Instituto Polis and YPBB have been working for decades in implementing zero waste solutions. And they will show distinctive features that you will learn in their presentation. So I will leave it to them to break the news to you. But it's important to remember that both countries are in the list of low methane partnerships. So we definitely expect to see positive progress in there. And also, we will be part of the delegation and coming to Baku. So we will pursue further conversations in there. So our call to action, just to recap, climate finance must move from harmful to impactful. We need to stop organic waste from being landfilled and incinerated, and climate finance must be accessible and support implementation at the local level. Today, you will hear our findings in this webinar, but we will be at COP29. So please join us in the official side event that will take place in November 14th. It's going to be live as well. So please join us. We will have some of the speakers that we have today in the webinar, but many more. So it's going to be, again, a great insight event into this conversation. That's all from me. Thank you very much. I look forward to your questions and continuing this conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mariel, sorry, for that great presentation. I will keep with the moving from a harmful model, a linear model that doesn't create value, to what we foster with the hierarchy. It's something that is not new, but it needs to be urgently implemented in the very short time with the crises that are surrounding climate and also pollution. So thanks for that, Mariel. I would like to give the floor to Victor, who is working in the preparations of both Baku, but also Belém next year COPs. So please, Victor, the floor is yours.
Hi, everyone. Can you see my screen? Is it okay?
Yeah.
Yeah. So thanks, GAIA. Thanks, everyone, for the invitation and all the work in this process. First of all, I apologize to all my Brazilian friends that I will not be speaking Portuguese to simplify the tech scheme of the translator. So I'll speak in English, but you can reach me in the chat or in the question and answers in Portuguese. So I'll share with you all a bit some case studies of Brazil and the situation in Brazil regarding organic waste management and the finance structure of this case studies, and understanding how we can grow this SCPI will show better this discussion about the finance. So just paving the way, showing what are these experiences and what is the context of Brazil. Brazil is a country with more than 200 million people. We estimate that we collect around 64 million tons of solid waste. We generate around 75, so around 10% is not collected yet. And we estimate that around half of this is food waste and also leaves, grass, not considering even paper and other type of waste that is also organic, but we send that normally for the dry recyclables fall. And currently we recycle less than 2% of the waste in Brazil, considering the organic waste is less than 0.3% of the waste. So we have a quite low recycling rate of organics, but we do have some good cases, studies, and examples that we are trying to roll out for the whole country. And also Brazil is the 5th largest methane emitter in the world. And the second largest source of methane in Brazil are the landfills, basically the waste sector, accounting for around 16% of the emissions in the country. And we have a complexity in Brazil that we can say that we have two Brazils inside Brazil. We have this green Brazil that's mostly south and southeast, that are cities that have more financial capacity, and they are working still, they are already working with landfills, but all this yellow and red Brazil are cities that are relying on dumps. Currently, around 25 to 30% of the cities in Brazil depend on dumps. All the waste goes to dumps, although it's around almost half of the cities. So we have a really barrier to overcome in different realities. So we have a lot of difficulty, especially in the finance, as today only around 66.3% of the cities collect the necessary money to spend in the waste management expenses that they have. And more than half of the cities of Brazil collect less than 25% of the money they need to run the waste management system. So they depend a lot on federal money to come and state money or take money out of education, health. So how do we fund this? Is a huge gap that we are trying to address with this study. So what are the case studies that we are talking about that give us hope that they have developed in the Brazilian context? A lot of different contexts we will show here that are running, are successful, and might be spread to other cities. What are the conditions that made possible for these case studies to happen? So in our sample, we have a different, like a range of sample that have different case studies for different realities. Talking about technology, we basically have composting and anaerobic digestion in Brazil. It's not that common to have from municipal solid waste like black soldier fly and other types. Mostly of the types are composting. People in Brazil prefer composting, especially due to its low cost and replicability, scalability for different size of cities. But different method of composting we are studying in this report, like home composting, passively aerated piles, turned piles that are the windrows, and also automated system. And we have a case study of anaerobic digestion that produces biogas for electricity production. But who runs the system? We basically have 5 types of frameworks of business models. We have waste pickers cooperatives, we have the conventional public system, we have the home composting that we chose to be a part of the system, but publicly funded. We have private decentralized systems that are normally social business of composting companies that, as we don't have this initiative by the state, they are offering these solutions for the citizens who want to engage in this. And also public-private partnerships that is a mix of companies that are owned by the state and also the private sector. Starting with one of the main projects that rose interest in composting in Brazil, we have the case study of São Paulo. São Paulo is the biggest city in the Southern Hemisphere. I might be wrong because also Lagos in Nigeria is growing really fast. And I don't have the data now, but it used to be one of the biggest cities in the Southern Hemisphere, but it's the biggest city in Brazil. It's 12 million people in the city and also 22, 21 in the metropolitan area. And they currently now have 5 composting plants, composting 50 tons a day. It's not that much compared to the scale of the city. It's only 0.3% of the organic waste, but it's a capacity that could solve the problem of 90% of the cities in Brazil. So it's applicable for them. And one interesting finding that we have, CPI will show, is that these composting plants with the collection, they are less expensive or the same cost of the landfill infrastructure and also scheme, because they have less transport costs and you don't need to pay the landfill gate fee. So it was an interesting find that we had in this study. But we also have models with waste pickers, and this is a huge point for us because just transition in the waste sector, it will look like empowering waste pickers where we have it. And in Brazil, we have a lot of work of the waste pickers transitioning to also working the organic waste management as service providers. And we have 2 case studies in our report that are Verdecop and Copercicla, that they run composting units for their cities. Copercicla runs a composting automated unit for mixed waste in this case, but they have separation and all that stuff for 21 municipalities, providing service for more than 130 people, 30,000 people actually. So this is a lot. And also Verdecop is a waste picker cooperative that without any state support, they developed a system to provide for hotels. And it's really important to show because we see that composting with waste picker generates at least 2 times more jobs than the public composting and 10 times more jobs per ton treated than the landfill. And we are specifically supporting the ones who most need and the ones most vulnerable in the process. And they also, it's not about only social investment that sometimes people feel that this is that's supporting. It's actually a solution. Verticop and Copercicla operate in a scale that could solve the whole organic waste problem for 80% of the cities in Brazil that have up to 20 to 30,000 inhabitants. So Waste Pickers Cooperative might be a solution for a huge part of our country. And Alberto will talk more about how the national government is supporting with funds to waste pickers cooperatives engage in composting and organic waste management. We have also Florianopolis featuring in the report. Florianopolis is the main city of zero waste in Brazil. They started already separate collection of organics and food waste in the city of Florianopolis. They have a recycling rate of the organic waste now around 10 to 11%. It's a big city. It's more than 500,000 people. And the system, we still don't understand the costs of the separate collection compared to the conventional one, but the composting system, only treatment to treatment, it costs us less than the process for the landfill. So the landfill and transport costs more than doing the composting inside the city. We need now to understand the trade-off between the separate collection and mixed collection. It's another city that is featured in this study. We have also, it's important, the other route for organic waste recycling is anaerobic digestion to produce biogas and biomethane. And we have a case study from Rio de Janeiro that was a city supported by the federal government with a grant for P&D to build a biogas plant that runs around 10 to 12 tons a day and is producing biogas. And also the OPEX cost of this unit, it's similar from the transport and landfill, but it needed support, especially in the CAPEX. And it was a Brazilian technology developed by tropical conditions, for tropical conditions applicability. And also by last but not least, actually it's the most important one before all of this, that is the decentralized composting system, the home composting projects. We have 2 home composting projects implemented by the city halls. One Rancho Queimado, they gave a composting bin for each household of the city. In the first 6 months, they reduced the waste management expenses by 30 to 40% by reducing the need of collection and also paying landfill. These case studies show a payback less than 1 year, as CPI will show. So basically, what are our conclusions and main messages for you all is that we need to rethink the municipal solid waste management logic based on high investment in equipment, technology, and centralized solution to invest more in people, less than technology and machinery, because these community-based models, waste picker-based, waste worker-focused, and local community-led solutions, they are cheaper, have a better impact, and more than a better impact, they have more long-term impact in the cities and the communities than the conventional ones. So feel free to drop in the chat any questions we have. Thank you.
Thanks, Victor. Thanks for that presentation. So much to cover, and so some short period of time. So we are going to move quickly to Piggy, who is going to present on the case study in Indonesia, where the people focus is central also for the approach. Over to you, Piggy.
Thank you, Nico. So if Brazil case was full of composting, and Bandung case we would have slightly different technology. It is a black soldier fly, fly larvae that we often find in compost pile. But the implementation of and the characteristics are the same. It is a small scale, mainly operation run by communities in micro enterprise on a backyard scale. That's processing less than 1 ton per day of food waste. So next. So the reason why this is the picture, if you haven't seen one, but the reason why BSF is so popular in Indonesia, because It has better economic value than compost. BSF becomes an alternative for animal protein with a wide spectrum of uses from poultry, fish, and pets. The fresh or the residue from the BSF is a good soil amendment, so compared to it's the same comparable to compost. So the outputs of BSF processing hold potential for multi types of products in urban agriculture. Next, please. So BSF in Bandung is a good example of community-based organic treatment. The power of this community-based model is small but many. So small operation, but in many places. Small in capacity, but it's highly scalable and adaptable to an urban setup with minimum space. Financially speaking, the community-based solutions are also competitive when compared to other technologies as CPI will also discuss later, especially if we consider the co-benefits on top of the financial benefits. What is also interesting is the environmental justice aspect of this model, where BSF farmers communities work collectively to build knowledge. So they learn from each other, building common knowledge, experimenting with their everyday tools and materials. As you see here, they building love cage, we call it, with the local material. And then they share their learnings on an online community called the Paguyuban Magot Nusantara. Through this democratic knowledge building process, they prevent organic waste from being landfilled while creating added value products that suit the local context. In all, collectively, this BSF farmer community in Bandung can process up to 25 tons per day. But we believe with finance and policy support, we can ramp up this number up to at least 4 times more, up to 100 tons per day. Next, please. But despite of their
sorry to interrupt, if you could speak a little more close to the mic, just to help with the interpreters here.
Is it better now?
Yeah, wonderful, thanks.
Okay. But yeah, despite their contribution, these people are not getting the support from the government and financiers. So we have a lot of organic waste. About 60% of waste in Bandung is organic, but finding a good source of organic waste is challenging. Most of them become organic waste pickers, we call it, getting waste from the wet markets, schools, and households. So they pick organic waste by themselves. So these people take multiple roles also as community educators and waste collectors. So this left a little time for them to do the actual work, that is to convert the organic waste. So their high capacity to expand and reduce more organic waste remain untapped. And source separation, as we see here, and waste collection is foundation for successful organic waste management. This is an essential public service that can only be delivered in sustainably by the local government. For instance, in one community where we work, waste segregated collection is implemented and supported by local government, the Lurah of Neglasari here in Bandung. We managed to have a more holistic impact because the system allows us to obtain clean organic waste that can be used for various organic waste treatment, which also has connected with local food production done by the local communities. We learned that government has a critical role in delivering core benefits through community-based solution by providing public infrastructure, space for urban farming, purchase the produce food from the urban farmer, and distribute the resulted fruit products for the less privileged part of the community. So, in conclusion, to realize their potential, these micro-scale organic entrepreneurs need to be supported to sustain and expand their work with a concerted effort from both local and national government to support them with accessible funds, operational costs, and organizational setup. We also see that community-based solutions pose a huge potential to reduce waste methane and deliver a lot of co-benefits. Climate finance must be accessible, inclusive to these local community groups who are at the heart of the zero waste implementation. We need strong policy support from the governments to ensure equitable finance and that can scale up the power of small but many to achieve our climate targets. That's from me. Thank you. Feel free to reach out for questions. Thank you, Nicole.
Nico, you are on mute.
Does that work? Sorry, I'm having some trouble. Okay, thank you.
That's
So I was
okay.
just thanking Piggy for the presentation and yeah, mentioning the interest that BSF opens for the options that we can consider for addressing organic waste. Who is going to, well, Tisa is going to talk a little bit about that diversity in these two case studies. So giving the floor to Tisa. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Nicholas. Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. So wonderful presentations from YPBB and Polis, and both organizations kindly shared those business cases, those case studies to CPI, and we ran the numbers on them. And this is what we're going to be showing you is our preliminary analysis on the numbers and the business models of those case studies that you just saw from Brazil and Indonesia. So this is what we call our bubble chart, where we basically plot the business models across this chart. The bigger the circle, that means they're managing more organic waste. The higher the circle, that means it's managed at a higher operating cost per ton. And the solid colors are Indonesia, the pastel colors are Brazil. And there's a few interesting things here. If you see, there are two dots starting on the left, and then they start to grow bigger, but go lower as they go to the right, right? That means that as they scale, they actually, as the business models scale, they actually can reduce costs. But we see that even the smaller scale ones, on the left are quite competitive. These are different business models. This is a community business model in Bandung. That's the one in yellow. Next to it is a private business model, the one in black. And the cost is quite competitive to each other. We also see in the middle, the $7 and the $8 dot, that's between a private sector model and a public model. So the price is also competitive, right? And we also see price competitiveness at a larger scale in Brazil, where the prices range around $16, $22, $29 per ton, which is quite competitive. So there's a few lessons or indications that we see here. First of all, community and public models can compete with private models, right? There's maybe a paradigm or a mindset that private models are more cost competitive or more effective. We don't really see that being the case here. We see that there's space for all of these business models to thrive and compete with each other. The second indication is that there's space for more efficiency if these models are scaled up. But the third indication is that there's a sweet spot to scaling up. Because when you see to the right, it goes a bit more expensive. You know, the biggest model on the right, it's $42. The price goes up. So it suggests that there's a sweet spot to scaling up that suggests decentralized models will remain more efficient. Because the models that are really large, they usually have a wider scope and jurisdiction. They have high transportation costs. So you want to scale, but if you scale in a centralized way, you add up, transportation costs, and that's probably not, cost competitive either. So there's a sweet spot in the middle, which I think is really interesting, and we'll explain more about in the next slides. So the challenges to scaling up are something that we've analyzed as well. The first is that there's municipal spending for organic waste per ton, or just waste per ton, varies from city to city. suggesting that some cities are more efficient than others in managing their waste, or that there's not a standardized model throughout the different cities, but overall really small numbers. So in Indonesia, we see municipal waste budgets being 0.3 to 2% of the total budget of the city. And in Brazil, we see 1.7% to 7% of the total budget of the city, which are quite small numbers. And we need more funding if we're going to handle all of the waste issues. The second challenge is that while there are business models that yield different returns, we see that, but there's an interesting finding that we found in Brazil, which you can see to the right. It has a big label on it that says savings. And if you see the green bar for savings, that is a really high bar. So that indicates that the savings alone from managing waste at the source, organic waste at the source, dwarfs the revenues from other business models, right? So unfortunately, these savings are not always quantified. We didn't see any business models in Indonesia, for example, quantifying those savings. We didn't see any cities quantifying savings from managing organic waste at the source. So if we were to quantify savings throughout all of the business models, we would be able to see that diverting organic waste from landfill is attractive. Now, we also looked at, capital expenditure and operational expenditure to see what kind of drives the costs of organic waste management. For capital expenditure, it's mostly fixed assets. So that is mainly land, and that contributes the most to total asset value. And this indicates that that would be a major barrier to entry for industrial players who will need quite a bit of space to conduct large-scale organic waste management, but it's less of a barrier for home composting. So we see business models that apply home composting actually have a pretty low capex because they're utilizing the land and gardens of existing households. For OpEx, the labor costs contribute the main bulk of costs. But this is a good thing because that indicates that organic solid waste management is labor intensive and it has the potential to create jobs. And this is an important aspect for countries like Indonesia and Brazil, and particularly for potential for waste pickers just transition. And we also found that the levelized cost of waste management, which means the cost over the period of its business, is comparable between community groups and government-operated groups, as well as private groups. So you see here how government-operated community groups in both Indonesia and Brazil actually are quite cost competitive compared to private sector. But also, interestingly, it can be more cost-effective as well than RDF or incineration. Those are the clusters of bars on the top right? So we even see here that we find certain community groups that have levelized cost of waste management that are lower than incinerators. And most of this is probably due to how community group models don't generate significant transportation costs, unlike RDF, incineration, and sanitary landfill. So this really indicates an opportunity to focus funding upstream, aligned with the waste hierarchy, to be targeted at organic waste management at source and at community group models, and that these models can compete with large waste treatment facilities in terms of cost. We talked about some of the co-benefits already. I talked about cost savings. I talked about job creation, but there are other co-benefits. There's social and community co-benefits with the distribution of products that are generated, not just the compost, but the maggots, as we heard. There's organic farming, there's vegetables that can be sold, and feedstock, right? And there's community engagement and encourages educational tools and urban farming. There's health co-benefits, there's increased air quality, reduced disease vectors, healthcare cost savings, because we're not relying on downstream solutions, and there's obviously environmental co-benefits. So if we could quantify these co-benefits, it could increase the value of organic waste treatment even further. So lastly, I'd like to conclude by a few recommendations. Data availability definitely needs to be improved. Community business models do need more capacity to conduct better bookkeeping. Better bookkeeping equals better numbers, equals better management, right? And public programs, data also needs to be more transparent, made available to public. For business models, we see that the revenues of community business models are right now relatively low compared to private business models, but the cost effectiveness, the efficiency overall remains competitive. For financing, we do need to design interventions closer to the source to reduce the main cost, which is land and transportation. So, decentralized business models need support. Grants are deployed a lot to community business models, and they need to continue being deployed to help early stage design of community business models and capacity building for their operations and their accounting. MDBs could fund public infrastructure. MDBs could fund cities' infrastructure, not for a huge, centralized kind of waste management facility, but for a chain of government-owned, community-operated organic solid waste management facilities. This is a big undertaking and it's a big ticket size, right? It does not mean it has to be centralized. It could be decentralized as well. For policy priorities, governments need to enact a minimum standard of organic municipal waste management. They need to allocate sufficient budgeting to pay for organic solid waste management as a public service. And they would need to properly account for budget savings from deploying organic solid waste management at source, which reduces the cost of their downstream treatment of waste. I'll stop there. I'll welcome any questions. Thank you so much.
Nico, your mic.
Sorry, yeah, I need to repeat that. So I was thanking Tisa. I hope you can hear it well. Tisa, because of these insights, I would like encourage everyone to post your questions in the panel so we can make sure we can get back to you during the end of this session or by email after this webinar. I would like to give 5 minutes each for Alberto and Donovan. So we can start with Alberto to share some reflections on what we have seen today, what we have heard about, and how this crosses with the first questions on the climate finance that this opens as an opportunity from these insights, and also how we can think strategically about COP for the same question. So over to Alberto. Thanks.
Bom dia a todos e todas. Muito obrigado pelas apresentações, né, que ocorreram aí durante essa manhã. Achei muito interessante, né, todas as apresentações. E eu gostaria de colocar aqui algumas atividades que o governo federal do Brasil tem adotado agora, né, principalmente o Ministério do Meio Ambiente e Mudança do Clima, tem adotado aqui nos últimos anos, né? Desde 2017, quando a gente lançou um primeiro edital para compostagem, né? O nosso foco inicial era na compostagem municipal, né? A gente percebeu que realmente os projetos que tinham compostagem descentralizada, principalmente aquela compostagem doméstica, como foi mostrado pelo Vitor em Rancho Queimado em Lages, acabaram alcançando um resultado melhor do que outros projetos municipais, né? Posteriormente, em 2019, a gente continuou com o trabalho de lançando editais, né, para gestão de resíduos, mas não teve um foco exatamente nos resíduos orgânicos, né? Era um governo distinto, né? O foco não era exatamente nas mudanças climáticas, não tinha esse foco na redução das emissões de metano, como a gente voltou a ter no ano passado, né? A gente lançou um novo edital e a gente teve aproximadamente 10 milhões de reais sendo aportados aí para apoiar os municípios também, mas dessa vez com a participação dos catadores e dos agricultores urbanos, né? O foco era, então, na compostagem, vinda dos catadores e fazendo todo o ciclo, né? Trazendo aqueles nutrientes de volta por meio da agricultura urbana, né? Esses projetos eles estão hoje em execução, né? Eles devem durar em média 3 anos e a gente está acompanhando a execução desses projetos, né? Em breve a gente deve ter resultados desses projetos. E no ano atual, né? A gente está agora a gente lançou um edital esse ano para apoiar novamente os catadores, e o foco, como o Vitor mostrou, né, no Brasil a gente tem distintas realidades, o norte e o nordeste do Brasil tem uma situação de gestão de resíduos, principalmente a disposição final mais inadequada, né, mais disposição em lixões e aterros controlados, é, e também na região central do Brasil também é uma situação parecida. Então, a gente focou exatamente os menores municípios, os municípios dessas regiões, né, Norte e Nordeste, e Centro-Oeste, e a gente deu também maior destaque para para aquelas cooperativas, associações de catadores que iam fazer a compostagem, né? A gente privilegiou os projetos que visavam a compostagem, né? Justamente por essa questão dela representar uma maior quantidade de empregos, reduzir as emissões de metano e reduzir também a quantidade de resíduos sendo dispostos de forma inadequada. Então, a gente privilegiou pequenas cidades nessas regiões onde disposição, cidades que tenham lixões e aterros controlados, né? Então, a gente está com aproximadamente 24 projetos sendo executados, que vão iniciar, né, a execução junto com os catadores, junto com as associações cooperativas. A gente entende que é muito importante, né? O governo federal tem investido muito nos catadores, por meio das associações cooperativas, né? Dos movimentos dos catadores, e o Ministério especial tem focado a questão da compostagem, como o Vitor colocou, né? A principal tecnologia que a gente tem utilizado aqui no Brasil, por causa dessa questão, tanto da escala, né? Dela ser mais adaptável para nossas realidades, né? Podendo pegar desde alguns projetos que vão focar na compostagem doméstica, como esses projetos maiores, né, focando a compostagem em nível municipal, uma compostagem centralizada, né, muitas vezes, como Florianópolis. Então, era isso, né, que eu tinha para pôr para vocês. Também gostaria de adicionar que a gente está atualmente elaborando um plano, né, nacional para redução dos resíduos orgânicos urbanos, né, e a reciclagem, focando inicialmente na prevenção ao desperdício de alimentos, né? Então, como a Mariel colocou na apresentação dela, o primeiro ponto, né, é a redução da geração de resíduos, né, para depois chegar até a disposição final. Então, a gente vai focar nisso e também, obviamente, no incentivo à reutilização né, reciclagem dos resíduos orgânicos, quer seja por meio da compostagem, né, nossa principal tecnologia, como também pela digestão anaeróbia, né? Então, a gente está elaborando esse plano junto com o Instituto Polis, né, nosso grande parceiro aí, ajudando o governo brasileiro a elaborar esse documento, que no começo do ano que vem deve estar disponível para toda a sociedade brasileira e, enfim, para servir de exemplo para outros países também. Então, era isso. Muito obrigado.
Obrigado, Alberto. Thank you for that. I will give the floor very quickly to Donovan, but I just would like to emphasize the importance of local action and collaboration that are critical to ensure that the climate solutions reach where those are most needed and impactful. This, I think it's a central part of what the CCAC does. So I will just keep that thought to Donovan to reflect on. Donovan?
Thank you, Nicholas, and thank you to all of the speakers. That's a great focus from Alberto there on, as these issues play out in the Brazilian context, some really nice examples, I think, there, which is very important, and they really, I think, gave great illustration to the work that's been done, which has been shared today. And I would just really like to congratulate all of those involved in the report. I think it's not only a very strong report and focus for today in terms of a waste perspective and an environmental perspective, but I also think the real value of this work is then really putting the spotlight of the finances around these ideas and being able to, I think, speak to a different audience than we often speak to. And that is that the great work that Tisa shared really allows us to speak in finance terms to ministries of economics, to financial organizations, to investment banks and what have you, in their own language, to be able to demonstrate the importance and viability of alternative ways of managing waste. In the context, I think, we could be very blunt about it, in the context of relative failure at a global level and at many national levels as well. We are speaking around these alternatives and around these positive examples in a broader context of failure of managing our waste. And we also know, looking forward for projections over the next 2 or 3 decades, what the implications of that failure will be, not only in terms of the generation of waste through increasing consumerism and, if you like, the success of development efforts of many states and how that plays out in terms of consumption patterns. But we also know how that plays out in terms of waste generation and the failure of our current systems to really deal with that in an effective way, which meets the needs of public health, but also broader, climate goals, as we now know. I just want to highlight 2 or 3 things that really came through for me from the presentation. One is the focus on scale, which I think that came through really nicely through the presentations. Landfills should not be the sole goal of rapidly emerging secondary cities, and nor should finding new landfill areas be the goal of the world's megacities. Increasingly, we're seeing, and I think the finance perspectives that came through, the economics of it that came through from Tisa, is that it's really not financially viable in terms of trying to operate large landfills to meet the needs of millions and millions of people. And neither is it viable for secondary and smaller cities simply because of scalable versus investment propositions. There is enough waste to be a problem, but not enough waste to present itself to a sanitary landfill solution. So I think having a frank conversation about scale, and not only scale, but the kinds of investment in decentralized approaches and away from, I think, this fallacy that centralized landfills are somehow the solution for our urban future. I think the second thing that really came through from me too was the focus on OPEX and CAPEX, but also attention to the cost savings model, which was pointed out. And I was recently in Durban, in which some really interesting stuff has been done there, demonstrating to the municipality that, in fact, it doesn't need to invest any more money into its waste management system. What it needs to do is to reduce the cost of managing its waste. And there is a series of propositions, particularly in using organic waste from the largest markets in the city, to demonstrate that it can create jobs if this organic waste is diverted and used for composting, for the botanic gardens, for municipal parks, for agricultural systems, and a very, I think, very convincing economic model was proposed to the city to say, if we do things differently, you will save money and we can return that money back to the municipality. And that's been successful at a very early stage. So instead of just thinking about waste as being a cost, we can look at waste in terms of its investment propositions. And we are currently putting a lot of money into the wrong things. It's not like we need to put an awful lot more money, sometimes in municipalities, into waste management systems. We need to redirect those finances and that money into the right and most effective forms of waste management. I think that came through really clearly in terms of the kinds of infrastructure that we need to build, decentralized infrastructure. And of course, very good news from the study from CPI on the fact that, you know, labor is really a key driver of the OPEX costs. And for countries in the global south looking for employment opportunities and small-scale business opportunities, waste really lends itself to this space. We've seen that through examples today, whether they be black soldier fly, composting, small-scale entrepreneurship, and what have you. And sometimes I think it's a problem of positioning things, and that we often talk about the need for the private sector to be involved. But in many countries, as we've seen in Brazil is a great example of that, the private sector is the informal sector. It's already involved. It dominates the solid waste management system of many countries, but it's not recognized as through that private entrepreneurship approach that the informal sector takes. And it's through their recognition in places such as Brazil as cooperatives and the formalization or the engagement with cooperatives that we can really see the informal sector as the private sector. And in that case, it's not necessarily a public burden, but an opportunity for more private engagement. And I think there we need to rethink then what I talked about in a conference earlier this year with GAIA about what we refer to as co and core benefits. For us, you know, sometimes from a climate perspective, the core benefit is mitigation, it's waste management and what have you. And we talk about job creation, we talk about livelihoods, we talk about just transitions and environmental justice as a co-benefit. But in fact, we can reframe that and think of those things as actually the core benefit of managing waste differently. The core benefit can be empowerment, it could be social inclusion, job creation, improved livelihoods for the poorest and most vulnerable. The co-benefit is improved waste management and less greenhouse gases from the way that we manage waste. So we really need to look at that issue of co and core benefits and reframe the conversation, I think, in a more progressive and future-oriented way that meets more people's needs. And very finally, what is really clear in this, and it came through particularly with some of the comments, is that solid waste management is now moved beyond from being a local concern, a local problem that some countries face, but that's kind of their problem, to now a global concern. It's an air quality issue, it's a greenhouse gas issue, it's an issue for the Paris Agreement, it's a challenge for NDCs and also transparent and complete reporting of this round of NDCs. And I'm very much hoping that the biennial transparency report process, the enhanced transparency framework, really encourage those that we engage with to understand their responsibilities to more effectively and more completely report on the emissions and the air pollutants that come from the way that waste management is being conducted at the moment, which allows communities such as this to provide a more comprehensive and sustainable alternative, which I think is much more in line with the goals of the Paris Agreement and also leaving no one behind as well. So thank you very much for the opportunity to participate today.
Thanks a lot, Donovan, for your reflections. I know we are past in time, so just being mindful of everyone's schedules. Yeah, I will keep like thoughts of Donovan about like the opportunity for collaboration and for some like transparency. We have that opportunity at COP next month. So please, if you are joining that, please take into consideration the official side event that's going to be held on November 14th at 11:30 local time. It's going to be about what we have been discussing today. Please also check the social media and website about GAIA's plans at COP. Also, we are going to have a methane pavilion for you to take that into consideration. And yeah, just thank you everyone for joining today. Please keep in mind that we are going to be addressing all questions posted here in the Zoom link, but also in LinkedIn for just you to be aware of that. And also don't stop sharing your thoughts, comments, worries, or whatever comes to your mind as we are going to be actively engaging with you all. So thank you again. And yeah, let's see soon. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye. Good to see you.